All right, so we've got one small talk left for me. I'm going to speak a little bit before we wrap up for the day about learning experience design. And it's kind of been an underlying theme through a lot of the things that we've covered in the conference so far. Everything from the Ray and Jane story to a lot of the presentations has really been about learning experience design. How do we do the best that we can? How do we create the best experiences for people? And what does that really mean? And how do we use technology to help us in that endeavor and to humanize the experiences that people have rather than to dehumanize them? That's always a challenge when it comes to technology. So I think that's probably the key at this point for me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about learning experience design. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and get the slides up. All right. So first I want to start with a story. I started to talk with Renee just now about my childhood education a little bit. And this is the same school where we learned how to use a fancy camera and build animations at a really young age. And this is my school. I can tell you what it is. It's called Green Acre School. It's in the DC area. It's in Rockville, Maryland. And that's where I went to elementary school. And it was a very defining experience for me, which is why I'm talking about it all these years later. But as a wonderful educational experience, the school was and still is a progressive education school. It's very project-based. It embodies really the themes and the concepts that we've been talking about throughout this conference and continue to do so. And one story that sticks with me is from 5th grade, so around 10 years old. And one of the projects we were asked to do, we were in a unit where we're learning about state governments. Okay, so in a traditional class, you might learn about state governments by, reading about them and taking a test on, what the different roles are and what the different divisions are and, what a governor is and all that kind of thing. That is not at all what we did. What we did was we were asked to pick a state, choose a state, any state you like, and create a scrapbook that explains sort of the key features of the state government. And it was really that open-ended. And I chose the state of Pennsylvania. I was actually born in the state of Pennsylvania. Lived there for 1 year. My father was doing his PhD and finished up after 1 year. So that was really my entire knowledge of Pennsylvania was that, very little, 1 year of, not being all that aware of all that much stuff. So I was curious about it. It was the state of my birth. I didn't know, get to pick a state. So already I was interested. There was a level there. I was like, I'm learning about a state that mattered to me. So what we did, we then asked to put together a scrapbook, and the process involved doing all sorts of things, calling, writing letters, trying to get the states to send you things. Also, library research at the time was before Google. All these kinds of things. You would find whatever you could find, and every student in the class was assigned, a state, or was asked to pick a state. Nobody was assigned a state, but everyone got to pick a state, and you had your own states. You're working independently, but we worked very collaboratively too, because you would often talk with your friends about what they were doing. Oh, I wrote a letter to the Chamber of Commerce. Oh, there's a Chamber of Commerce. So I didn't know that. Let me try that for my state. And so you would share ideas, and it was a very non-competitive environment. The school was structured that way. The culture of the school was very much one that fostered creativity and non-competitive work. And so we worked together on that. And then the teacher played the role really of a coach. I mean, it was really like having an advisor more than a teacher. So you would meet with the teacher specifically. You'd meet as a class. You also meet individually, and she would help you through she'd ask what you were doing. You would update her. She would make suggestions depending on where you were going and what she thought. And it was very much a coaching relationship, and you very much did look up to her and her expertise, and she knew a lot more than we did, both about state governments and how to get information. But she wasn't trying to tell you what to do all the time. She would look for your ideas and kind of gave you some ideas when you needed it, and sent you out in the wild to go see what you could do. And that's one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had. And so we produced these scrapbooks that looked something like this. I looked long and hard. Last time I was at my parents' house in the garage for the actual scrapbook. I'm convinced it still exists. My parents keep things. It's got to still be there, but I did not find it. It looked roughly like this: the state seal and the state coin and the state bird, and a lot of information about the governmental agencies and all of that. So to sum up a little bit about the logistics, we had 1 teacher and 15 students roughly. We did have budget, so we had to pay for stamps. We had to pay for long distance phone calls. That was the thing back then. That was fine. So we did not really have budget limitations. And we were, as I mentioned, very encouraged to talk with each other about the project And it was the nature of the school anyway. It was the culture. It was a natural thing for people to do. So what were some key elements of the experience? Well, there was learn by doing, right? We learned by, we weren't learning to be the governor. We didn't get to do that. But we learned certainly by doing things. We were very active and very much in a constructive way. We're building something. So this was a create to learn, in the pre-YouTube days, right? We were creating something as part of the learning experience and as really the core of the learning experience. Everything was around the goals of creating things. And one side effect of that was that you got very emotionally involved in the project, and that was of tremendous value. We had one-on-one coaching and mentoring. So this is an element that we can bring into things today, right? So we had, as I mentioned, we had the teacher who was working with you as a mentor, not talking at you and telling you what to do and asking you to memorize things, but working with you on a project that had meaning to you and meaning to her. A lot of collaboration with other students. We worked together in lots of ways. We shared ideas. We, gave each other, our experiences. And then, as I couldn't help mentioning earlier, there was a really strong emotional connection to the project. And that started with the idea that you got to pick your own state. Right? So from the beginning, you're not even told, you get to pick something that has meaning to you. There are 50 states in the US. Some have personal meaning to each person more than others. And I chose one that had personal meaning to me. And then everything about the structure of the experience was very, very much one that you connected with emotionally. You got a lot of say in things and how they went to. It was very creative. You would end with a product. You could, work on things kind of in your own way and in your own style. And all of that played into the emotional connections, I think, that I and others had with that project. If we look back, it's not something we get in most learning today. And so you look back to early education and training, and in the early days, it was about apprenticeships, right? And that was one of the early education models. You would work with an expert. You would learn to be a craftsman. You learn to be a blacksmith. You'd work with an expert. You might start by tending the fires, and then you move up to getting to, hold the iron while the blacksmith did the work. Then you'd get to maybe do a little bit of work on something that you couldn't screw up too badly. Then eventually you'd get to the point where you could become an expert yourself as time went on. And that was a great model in a lot of ways. It was all of these things that we just said. It was learned by doing. It was, there was coaching and mentoring. You might have an emotional connection. You're creating something. Again, you'd learn by practicing. So I'll walk through some of the advantages. Okay, we had a coach. We had an experienced mentor. Also, getting back to a point that Larry and some others made earlier, apprenticeships were not just a one-time event. So you would continue to work with and consult with the master, the expert. Right? So you didn't just take a course on crafts and then go away. You were practicing on a daily basis, and you were practicing with expert guidance on a daily basis. So we lost apprenticeships because they didn't scale up well. I mean, it's not that they don't exist now, but that was sort of replaced by mass learning. And so if we look back at the evolution of education, these are just sort of selected moments that have stood out to me. Not that I was here for all of these in 1250 BC. BC, the apprenticeships were when supposedly were the first apprenticeships. It might have been at a different time. In the 1800s, we saw mass education. And when we saw classrooms, you needed a way for things to scale up. And all of a sudden we had the need to train and teach a lot more people than ever before in a different way. You don't have enough experts to do that. Apprenticeships couldn't scale up, and you need to teach people a broader variety of things. So things had to scale up in terms of content. They had to scale up in terms of coaches, instructors, whatever the role was. You end up kind of with the classroom model that still continues today in a lot of ways. If we jump ahead to the 1980s, we saw computer-based training, and a lot of the early computer-based training was based on classroom learning. We still see too much of that today. You see too much memorizing, too much testing, page turning, read, watch, and test, and that just doesn't really give you the experience that that's going to really buy you all that much. One thing I was involved in the late 80s, early 1990s, learning by doing simulations, so I put them here. I did my PhD at a research lab in Northwestern called the Institute for Learning Sciences, which was started by a guy named Roger Schank, whose name still floats around. At Yale at the time, who came to Northwestern University to start a lab based on AI in education, where we brought together cognitive psychology, education, and computer science, and particularly AI techniques all under one roof. And a lot of the work that we did there was unlearned by doing simulations. A lot of my own work was as well. And this was a very effective model. You take a lot of what we've talked about, the experience and the emotional connection, and the learn by doing, and the coaching, mentoring in some form. Maybe it wasn't a person, but you kind of had a coaching component that was more individualized, and you had all of that. And that's just been a model that's taken longer than I thought to take hold as strongly as it might. It's not as expensive as it used to be, but relative to page turning, it's harder to produce and takes more thought to produce. But it's well worth it. And we always see when we're able to measure anything, we can't always measure ROI as much as we would like, as I talked about with Tim. But when you do get to measure, we've seen some really, really good results, and it's very different than what you see, from a page turning memorization task. Well, the web-based training in the early 1990s, it seemed to me to take the wind out of the sails of some of the simulation work in some ways, because all of a sudden you had access through the web, you had intranets, and that was a great thing that you could have. You weren't sending out CD-ROMs and, asking people to put things on hard drives. But what you saw was often more limited. What you could do quickly and easily was often more limited. And a lot of people producing product were producing things that were not really founded on educational principles. And we saw a lot of the snake oil salesman that Ryan Baker referred to this morning come along. So it's taken some time, I think, to get us to a better point, and we're still getting there. Another big point was MOOCs, which have their pros and their cons, in my opinion. The massive open part is certainly great, and there are some absolutely fantastic MOOCs run by great instructors. As a model, it has a mix of sort of, sometimes being too passive, and we see people drop out, sometimes because they simply didn't need everything, which is totally fine, and sometimes because the courses aren't that interesting. So there's, again, a balance of what, at least in my view, what we want and what we don't in a learning experience. Which kind of brings us to today, where, I put a question mark here on the slide because there's simply so much that we can keep doing. I've only mentioned some things. I've left out some of my own work and that of, I think, many of the people at this conference. We cannot fit it all in. But as far as what's mainstream is still too much of the simpler kind of learning, not enough deep learning experiences that people really connect with, that put them in positions to learn by doing and to acquire skills and focus on all the right things. And to me, right now is the opportunity, more than ever, particularly in the times where everybody is all of a sudden online, doing remote learning, where there's such tremendous interest in what we can do, that we can take advantage of that as a field to really publicize a lot of the great ideas and a lot of the great experiences that we can produce. A couple of goals. What we want in a great learning experience, one is to scale up to serve a large audience, also to scale up to serve a geographically diverse audience. So people are everywhere, and that's one of the great things about technology. And hopefully we can also do it right. Like, so you build a great AI infused personalized experience, and you build that for one person, you may as well build it for 1 million or 10 million or 100 million anywhere in the world that has access. And that's the goal. The goal to me is to build those really fantastic experiences that are personalized and scale up and that are very human. And that's where technology can really, do more than it has. And we've seen examples in this conference, we've seen examples elsewhere in the world, but it's not enough yet. It's not really what you see everywhere. And that brings up the third point, which is do so in a way that's affordable. And that's what we have to be careful about, that, it's great to do some of these things, and even some of the things that I've been involved in are still only available to those who can afford them, and to look at ways that we can use technology to make great learning experiences affordable and available to anyone. And the final point, doing all of these things while providing high quality, enjoyable, humanizing, personalized learning experiences. So they all kind of go together. And that's a lot of the set of goals that I see for great learning experiences. And new technologies, to me, along with the research in cognitive science and education, in design, technology, and others, can help us do this. And that, to me, is a goal that I think we all have at this conference, and we have an opportunity to really kind of take another big step in changing the way that we reimagine education and training and what it really means to do that. You saw a little bit in the opener this morning of this this AI example of someone going to ancient Greece. I'll show this a little bit more tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about this example. Here's another AI example in the workplace with a woman customer who's being served by somebody who has an AI coach available to her. So a few different things there. I'm going to show that demo as well during one of my talks tomorrow. So, summary for learning experience design principles: follow active learning, follow situated learning. These are principles that we've kind of covered throughout the day a little bit. Experiences should be immersive, relevant, personalized, resulting in the learner being connected to the experience. And the technology, again, can do a lot of things if we employ it in the right ways to create the right experiences. And everything we build with technology is scalable, and that's the key to reaching a wide audience and putting people in position to have a different kind of educational experience than they've often been able to receive. That's going to wrap up for me for this talk. I did want to note, I want to show a few demos of some good learning experiences that just kind of trigger what we can do today, in addition to some of the things I've talked about, what we can do in the future. That's on the docket for tomorrow. So I look forward to seeing all of you then. So that's going to wrap it up for the day. So thanks once again for spending the day with us. Hope you enjoyed everything, and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks again.